What is up? What is up, everybody? And welcome to A to G Lifestyle, where we're fighting cultural pursuits of money, power, and sex with the fulfilling pursuit of confidence, discipline, effectiveness, efficiency, focus, all while walking with God. That sounds like a 5 greater than 3 situation to me, because 5 is greater than 3. Is it not, gentlemen?
I don't know, Chris. That sounds like a weird slogan to me.
Oh my goodness. We'll get him on board with something eventually. But anyway, welcome. How about this? Usually we have 3 of us, but I don't know. If you're watching us live right now, you can tell that there are indeed 4 of us on today's stream. How's it going, Mr. Scott Moody?
It's great. Yeah, I'm doing really well. Happy to be here.
Yes,
Thank you. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. And for those of you who are listening to this post-recorded, this is in fact Gavin's dad, who's decided to join us for today's discussions. I'm looking forward to it. How's it going though, gentlemen? How's the week been?
It's been good. It's been busy, work being what it is. So that's just how it is. I'm really excited to start talking about China. Well, because China's China, so let's do it.
China's China. Yeah. Fair enough. Gavin, how's it going?
Oh, it's been great, man. Also pretty busy, but had a pretty good day today. Went up skiing. That was pretty fun. But yeah, I'm also very excited for China. This is going to be a fun episode, dude.
Man, everybody's excited for China. This is what we love to see. When the hosts are excited about the topic, you know it's about to be good. Anyways, how's it going, Scott?
Really good. Yeah, I haven't had the day you guys have had, but I've just been doing a lot of research. I'm excited to contribute.
Fair enough, man. Sounds good to me. Gentlemen, any comments before we get into today's discussion?
How are you doing, Chris? How was your day?
Oh, thank you. Somebody finally asked. Oh, man. I was hoping I didn't sneak through the cracks there or something. It's been good. It's been a busy weekend. Lots of homework for cost accounting. But, other than that, can't complain. I get to spend my Saturday evenings with you guys and our lovely viewers. So, I can't complain.
Good.
Yeah. But other than that, I think we'll hop right on into it. Why not? But before we do, obviously, shout out to everybody who's in already. I think we already have a few viewers, which is something we've never had before this early in the stream. So for those of you who are watching right now, thank you for your viewership or your listenership. It is very much appreciated. We do like interacting with our listeners. So if you want to at any point in time contribute to our conversation through the comments, you can most certainly do that. We will respond to pretty much any comments that come through if they're relevant to the topic, maybe sometimes even if they're not relevant to the topic. But we highly encourage listener communication. Other than that, feel free to like, share, and subscribe. But with that, I have no other comments. Let's get right on into it. Why don't we? So the first topic that we're discussing tonight is China and their recent aggression on the global scale. So, the issue of China is an interesting one to summarize and to break down in general. But effectively, since we're American, we might as well start off with the American's perspective, right? So, the relationship between China and the United States has been pretty complex over the last few decades or so. Lots of distrust issues, but the relationship is interesting because we are very economically dependent on each other, right? So, over the years, it's been kind of a back and forth, interesting relationship. But as of 2021, China and the United States are the first and second, or second and first, I believe, largest economies in the world in one of those 2 orders. I think there are several different measurements that have China number 1. There are some that have the United States number 1. So these are 2 massive global superpowers in today's day and age. And between the 2 countries, like I've already said, there have been a few issues that have arisen. Most notably recently most of the tensions have involved Taiwan and the issue of China claiming Taiwan as its own. The United States kind of siding with Taiwan and saying, no, they've kind of claimed their independence from you, let them be. But there are a lot of concerns with China's role in trying to harass Taiwan, because Taiwan is very critical to what China is trying to do with their current agenda at a global stage. Their one China policy is obviously trying to bring back all the quote unquote parts of the mainland China to be one China. Very creative name. How about that? But other than that, I think the 2 countries just remain in dispute, the 2 countries being the United States and China, that is, over a few other things. Aside from trades and economics, mostly it has to do with China claiming some territory in the South China Sea. And the United States has been very, very they've been pushing back against the idea of China trying to claim things in that region of the world that are technically seen as international waters that aren't really theirs. And the United States would like to have the ability to run its military personnel through that part of the world because, I mean, it's international waters, but China is kind of being a problem child in that regard. Couple all of this with the fact that recently China apparently had one of its weather balloons blow off track, so far off track that it ended up in the continental United States and was observed, I believe, over Montana sometime earlier in the week. Somebody correct me.
Yeah,
I want to say Friday. Thursday? Okay. So Thursday there was what China claimed to be a weather balloon that got blown off track, spotted above Montana. But then there was actually another Chinese weather balloon that was spotted over Latin America. So now China is getting all sorts of heat for having their property wander into other countries, which usually is a problem when we're talking about sovereign nations. But I do want to put this out to the panel now and kind of get their initial assessment of this whole issue of China being just a problem at the global stage.
If I may, I want to add a little bit more onto the background of the China-Taiwan-U.S. dispute. So the origins of this dispute, they go back to the end of World War II. With the defeat of Japan, the Chinese Civil War resumed, and the People's Liberation Army, it defeated the Republic of China, and they forced an exile to Taiwan. But the United States, after World War II, developed this policy of containment against communism. So what happened was the U.S. initially didn't recognize the People's Republic of China as the real China, and instead recognized the Republic of China, the one on Taiwan, the government on Taiwan, as the real China. But since then, the People's Republic of China, mainland China, it has developed strong economic ties with all of the rest of the world. I mean, us living in the United States, we're familiar with the Made in China label. They have a lot of economic power. But it's kind of resulted in a very strange Cold War where mainland China, the People's Republic of China, does not recognize Taiwan as an independent state. And the US, technically they're not, but we'll still treat them as such. And if you try and do anything about it, we will go to war with you. But that's really where we're at with the Taiwan situation. But I want to turn that back over to you guys.
So I just wanted to add something there to get what Gavin stated. So China was split off basically into two countries. However, both of those countries, that being Taiwan and China, legally believe that they are the true China, and that Taiwan believes it should control all of mainland China, and China believes it should control all of Taiwan. So that's a very interesting dynamic, because you basically have two governments that are in conflict with one another, as Gavin was indicating, but they both believe that they're the true heir to China. So that's a major part of the conflict there. And China, as a policy, refuses to recognize other nations with treaties and trade if they recognize Taiwan as the true China, or as a state in general. And that's quite significant in terms of foreign relations with China, because if you're not recognizing, if you recognize Taiwan, then all of a sudden China doesn't want to do major trade with your country. So that's why Taiwan, for the last couple of decades, has slowly become less and less a part of the market. Because more and more countries are recognizing the manufacturing capabilities of mainland China for cheap goods, and that is removing their ability to do business with Taiwan.
So that's interesting.
Yeah. So to also continue on to what Gavin said, basically until Jimmy Carter, the United States was recognizing mainland Taiwan, not mainland Taiwan, the island of Taiwan, as the true legitimate government of China. However, Jimmy Carter said that if we bring China into the economic model of the rest of the world and recognize mainland China and begin trade with mainland China, Jimmy Carter thought that it would reduce the appeal of communism within China and eventually make China become a democratic state. However, that has not occurred and probably won't occur anytime in the near future, as China has become more tyrannical over time and not less so. Right? They kind of split off, the billionaires and millionaires club of China as their own independent thing, and then kept, the rest of China underneath their oppressive regime. So that's something to be aware of as we jump into this discussion.
And I also want to add on to a little bit more. The authoritarian regime set up by the Communist Party there in mainland China, it is one of the biggest reasons why there is no possible unification between the two, because in Taiwan, it used to originally, in the government in exile, the original POs, the People's Republic, not the People's Republic, the Republic of China, the original one was a military dictatorship, and it was under martial law until 1987, I believe. But there was a guy, I forgot his name. He's referred to as Mr. Democracy. Yeah, Li Tenghui. He instituted some reforms that democratized the country, and they've been their presidents have been democratically elected since 1996, and since then there's been a growing democratic movement within China. And in 2014, there was a trade deal between the two nations that was proposed. It was called the Cross-Strait Service Trade Agreement, which was basically a free trade agreement between Taiwan and mainland China. But there was a big movement called the Sunflower Student Movement that protested this, because what was going to happen, why mainland China proposed this idea, was to create an economic dependency, Taiwan to have an economic dependency upon mainland China, and then forcefully use that dependency to incorporate it into the mainland. But since then, it's just created further divide between the two nations and made reconciliation even harder.
Yeah. And well, you could pair that with what I just stated earlier, right? Where if you recognize Taiwan, mainland China wouldn't conduct trade with your country to a significant extent. So, by cutting off all supplies to Taiwan, by saying we're going to get rid of your manufacturing base if you support Taiwan, really does make Taiwan more susceptible to that tactic, which they tried with that free trade agreement.
That's a lot of good stuff there, guys. And I mean, a lot of important stuff that we're going to have to get into in a little bit more detail. But I want to see if Scott has any initial observations about China's aggression on the world stage.
Yeah, I've been doing some kind of looking into, why China thinks that they have a claim over Taiwan. And so, they have for hundreds of years, for 1700 to 1900, they actually did rule Taiwan. And then they ceded it to Japan. And so after World War II, obviously when Japan was defeated, Taiwan was kind of up for grabs. And initially China's like, hey, we ruled this country before, or this island before, so we would like to take it over again. And actually initially the United States and Britain were very supportive of China taking back over control of Taiwan. But then, like you guys have mentioned, after the Communist Revolution and the dictatorship that was there after World War II, they went to Taiwan and they set up their secondary government. So they have some history. China definitely has history in Taiwan. But then in 1992, China and Taiwan met in Hong Kong, and they came up with something called One China. And it was an agreement, but it was a verbal agreement. And it basically it's not much more than the One China phrase, but neither country could agree on what that actually meant. China said, oh, great, one China, we're Beijing, we're China. That means Taiwan, you're ours. Taiwan didn't look at it like that. They said, well, there's one China, and that's you guys. We're not China. And so there was nothing from it. But those are the two claims that China has on Taiwan, that we've historically been there. There's a lot of our people that migrated there after World War II with that provisional government. And then they can say in 1992, Taiwan basically said they were part of China, even though the Taiwanese are not actually agreeing with that. So that's where they have their claim on the country, and that's just the one side of it. There's probably so much more to it, like the technology that Taiwan has, the influence in the South China or the Taiwanese Strait that China obviously wants to project their power into where Taiwan is. So there's a lot more to it, but that seems to be what they're hanging their hat on. Like they said, one China, and we've been there for a long time.
And to further add on to that a little bit with the mainland China's one China policy being, yeah, Taiwan, you are a part of mainland China. I think it was 2005. Yeah, they published Law Number 33, the Anti-Secession Law, which formally declared that if Taiwan declares independence, like it declares itself to be an independent state and is recognized for it, China is authorized to use military force against it. And that kind of gets at why this is really an issue here. Because and I don't remember what year it was. I think it was 1979, the U.S.-Taiwan Relation Act. Correct me if I'm wrong, Andreas.
Yeah, I got it right here. I think it's 77.
77, yeah. But
let me look here. But it's somewhere close to that.
Yeah, either way, though, it was established as an informal declaration or a semi-informal declaration that should China go to war with Taiwan, the United States will be there to protect it. And, the United States being the world superpower, that law still holds into effect. We still have the most potent military potential on the planet. We'll get into that a little bit more with the possibility of war with China later. But what would end up happening if China did try and do anything was they would have to fight the full front of the United States military should Taiwan declare itself be independent, in essence.
It was April 10th, 1979.
Yeah. Sweet.
Okay. I mean, that's interesting because relatively recently, I guess, wasn't it President Biden who said that we would go to protect Taiwan if China did enforce any aggressive activity towards them? And everyone was kind of like, oh, I don't know what he's talking about. No, we're not going to war with China or anything. So is that you said that law is still in effect today, yeah?
It still is in effect, yeah. So I believe there was an incident. I think it was the 18th of January, this just past January, where China, what they started doing, which is why we're talking about this now, is they just started flying planes towards Taiwan's airspace, like fighter jets, towards a sovereign nation. And they also sent ships over into Taiwanese waters. And the United States response was to just, oh yeah, we've got a warship. It's just hanging out in the Taiwanese Strait. I don't know what it's doing there. It seemed like a nice place to put a warship.
And their Chinese response was the reason why they said they did that was in response to America, and they're getting 4 new military bases in the Philippines, which really angers the Chinese, and also too that they were doing war games with South Korea in the South China Sea. So China's saying, well, hey, we're not provoking it. You guys are provoking us, and we're doing this stuff, these flybys into Taiwanese airspace because we have to, because it's the West is pushing in on our interests. And that's how they see it. They see Taiwan as theirs, and it's Absolutely. An internal conflict. It's like anybody coming get into our business. They've been very clear. I was watching a video with the foreign minister of China, and he was extremely clear. It's a Chinese issue, and anybody that opposes us externally is going to be crushed. And I use the word crushed as a quote. He's like, we will meet anything with force.
Absolutely.
So they're dug in.
Right. It's the same thing that was with Hong Kong too, right? Where when Hong Kong was beginning to be taken over, China was very aggressive with media, right? Like the NBA and video game companies and things like that were critical of the Chinese takeover of Hong Kong, because they also believed it was an internal issue, right? They were just they're just unifying China. So this is a very similar stance. However, it's more military involved, because it's not a bunch of, internet people making video games, but it's militaries and shipping and things like that are the threat to that Chinese reunification.
Yeah, and I think Hong Kong, I mean, it was an agreement. I mean, they went willingly, and they knew they were going to go back to China, right? And it seems like Taiwan, they don't want to. Ironically, they don't want to stay. They just want to keep it status quo. Everything I saw was like they really don't want to change anything. They don't want to be Chinese. They don't want to necessarily completely identify as Taiwanese. They just want to kind of leave it.
Yeah. I don't know how much of that is just, apathy, or, just wanting things to stay the same, or strategically thinking that they just have to outlive Xi, and then they might be in a better position globally, right? Because that could be a very real possibility, right? If they outlive Xi, they become a much stronger player globally with the aftermath of Xi going away.
And he goes away. Oh, go ahead, Gavin.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, on that note, that might be, Taiwan might be playing their cards incorrectly there. Because the CIA director, William Burns, was recognized for an award at the Georgetown School of Foreign Service just a couple of days ago. And he is quoted with saying, "We know as a matter of intelligence that Xi Jinping, instructed the People's Liberation Army to be ready by 2027 to conduct a successful invasion. Now, that does not mean that he's decided to conduct an invasion in 2027 or any other year, but it's a reminder of the seriousness of the focus of his ambition." And he's also added on that there is a Taiwanese election in 2024, and that is that can be used as a weak point to then, like, hey, they're framing it as they're electing themselves. This is a matter of, a renegade province that we need to deal with. He was hinting at there might be war by 2025, but that's just all up in the air right now.
That 2027 date, I heard that as well. I thought it was ironic that that's actually when President Xi loses his current term is up in 2027 as well.
Well, I mean, that might then why they want to be prepared by then, right? So when he leaves and he's no longer being the head honcho in charge, they actually have a game plan to go by, right?
But I don't think
as a way to keep in power potentially, he can start something. Yeah.
Well, the Democratic Republic of China, right, is not very democratic, right? This is Xi's third term, and he doesn't appear to be going anywhere. I don't remember where I read it, but Xi, I can probably find it later. I might post a link in the chat at the bottom, right, the comments, if I find it again later. Xi got rid of a lot of his political rivals, not necessarily his political enemies, a few years back. I remember reading that a few years ago. So there's not really a good, competent replacement for Xi in the case that he were to go away. So it would not be advisable, for the Chinese Communist Party to say, hey, Xi, you're going away in 2027. So the Communist Party is likely to just reinstate Xi by default in 2027, right? Unless he gets too old or dies of age, because he's getting quite old in age, right? So you might see that. And that's why when I stated, Taiwan might be thinking we might just be able to outlast Xi, it goes back to what I just stated a second ago. If there's no political strength behind the remaining people in politics in mainland China, right? China's going to become weak the second Xi, passes, and they'll become, stronger as a world player because Xi's gone, and Xi already removed all of his rivals that would be able to steer China in any meaningful direction upon his passing. So yeah.
Oh, there's some like history to that as well. Is that when the president of the the Communist Party of China, and then the People's Republic of China and Taiwan, when their leaders died, in relations between Taiwan and China improved significantly after their passing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like you had the hardliners there, and then once they passed away, there was a marked improvement. And that's, I think, kind of led to Taiwanese starting to think that, we're not Chinese anymore. We identify as Taiwanese. But after that, I guess they were allowed to, if you lived in China, you can go see your relatives in Taiwan after they passed, or the leaders passed. So yeah, there was just a lot more freedom. But yeah, so there is some history to that they can maybe wait something out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Xi right now is 69 years old. So, in 5 years, 74. So, it's a real possibility that he stops being able to rule China in any meaningful way, just due to age, right? When you start getting that old, you begin getting Alzheimer's, and you begin, aging, getting Parkinson's possibly, things like that begin to happen as you age, right? So it's going to be a much weaker China soon as Xi, stops being able to be the head honcho of China.
Mm-hmm. And going off of that, I think, Chris, you wanted to talk about how China could be a paper tiger.
I was going to transition us there, actually, right as you said that. So that was perfect timing. Shall I?
Yes, please do.
Okay, then that's what I'll do. So, but before I do that, actually, first, obviously, I got to remind you to like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already. Aside from that, it's interesting that this is kind of a family issue with the whole China-Taiwan thing, right? The whole one China thing isn't really an official agreement that we know of. It's more so just a quote-unquote familial fight, right? That brings up an interesting point then, that someone who might be listening to this or watching might be thinking to themselves, well, wait a second. If it's just a family fight, then why is the United States trying to get involved in this issue? Does anybody have any ideas as to why maybe this particular region of the world, that strait, that sea, might be critical to the global economy? Because I know, for one, Taiwan is I believe, number one producer in the world, or one of the top producers in the world of things like semiconductors. I think they make 65% of the global supply of semiconductors. And for those of you who don't know what a semiconductor is, just look at anything that runs in your house and is powered by electricity, or anything that is motorized, anything that moves because of technology is probably powered, and in fact is powered, by a semiconductor. So those things are very crucial to the way a lot of our infrastructure functions. Why do we think that this particular region of the world is very critical and that we need to have our hands in that?
Well, it absolutely is about the silicon, right? As Chris just stated, silicon, the semiconductors and silicon wafers being more significant, are in everything that we use here in the States and across the globe, right? Even our missiles, right, use silicon wafers for their computing. And so if we were to lose that resource, to have silicon wafers, a lot of our infrastructure, a lot of our defensive capabilities, a lot of our production and trade simply begins to falter because of that lack of that base material, which is why we should begin considering, and already have considered, I believe both under Trump and under Biden, that we're going to begin preparing to make silicon wafers here in the United States, right? And so that's a major component, because if we were to lose Taiwan silicon, right, we would lose a lot of our ability to manufacture goods here in the States. And it's not very quick to set up a silicon plant. It's not easy, and it takes a lot of effort because of the conditions, right? You have a very extensive clean rooms, very extensive processes that all need to be developed for every single facility, right? You've got humidity controls and things like that all need to come into place. in order to begin to make these wafers. And so I was reading, a few months ago about this topic, and they were talking about it something like 6 years, right, between the decision to start making a plant and actually completing a plant to begin to make silicon. That's even before the processes are developed for that specific plant to make the wafer. So it's a not insignificant timetable to begin making silicon wafers. What we saw during COVID-19, when world trade basically began to collapse, we saw that lack of wafer begin to make significant impacts into cars and car prices, to PS5s and the lack of PS5s that were for sale. So just imagine completely removing 65% of silicon from the world market, and you've got huge ramifications. And it's partially why China probably wants to take Taiwan, is to get control over those silicon plants so that they continue to have relevant trade. So that's why it's going to be, I'm talking faster than I can speak all my thoughts. That is why I question China's tactics for taking Taiwan, because in taking Taiwan, if they were to use air, like people are talking about, right, with their flyover jets and things like that, you have a strong likelihood of damaging the infrastructure to handle taking control over those factories, right? If you bomb that factory, you don't have a silicon factory anymore. So when I'm looking at the situation, I'm seeing that sea is probably the only way that China could successfully take Taiwan in a significant sense, because you limit damaging of key infrastructure if you were to do an aqueous invasion, amphibian invasion of Taiwan. So a lot of these planes and flyovers, I don't think are going to ever attack Taiwan, in my opinion, because those silicon factories are just too valuable. I don't know if that answers your question there, Chris, about why Taiwan's valuable, but that's basically sum and substance of it.
Yeah, no, I think it did. It answered a decent amount of it, at least. And that is actually something I was aware of, I believe, back end of last year. I did a research paper for one of my grad school classes about the whole issue of how the COVID-19 pandemic affected supply chains here in the United States. So I did learn that those semiconductors are very important and they're very valuable, especially to things like vehicles, which we use every day. But yeah, I mean, that just goes to show, right? It goes to show how a lack in the supply of such a small, little, seemingly insignificant thing like a semiconductor can really impact the lives of a lot of people around the world. I mean, I guess it's also important that we are able to maintain a military presence there, considering that we do have that agreement from 1979 to protect Taiwan in the case of an invasion by China, assuming they do claim that they're a sovereign nation, right? So the ability to be able to practice and engage in different types of military activities in that region of the world would be important. And I mean, just in general for other countries too, right? Not even just us, because there are allies who probably want to have similar abilities, who might be supportive of us if we were to engage in a battle or a war with China. And that would be critical to them too. I'm interested to see if we have any other thoughts about that area of the world before we do transition into what Gavin wanted to talk about as to why China might not really be as big of a threat in the near future or the future, really, quite honestly, at all. Before we transition into that, do we have any other thoughts about why Taiwan would be valuable?
Yeah, I just another thing. It kind of leads into the paper tiger, paper dragon motif, but it's the United States is currently the world superpower. We are the forerunner in our influence extends further than any other nations on the planet, and it's only really possible because of the military presence that we have basically in every part of the planet. Our Navy patrols the sea lanes. Our Navy is our military is stationed in outposts across the entire world. And when we have a precedent of defending Taiwan. We have been doing it since the 1950s. And should we go back on our claim now, as China's growing ever so stronger, and it looks from the outside and the inside that there are more political rivalries in the United States, like disuniting us. It puts us at a point of weakness on the world stage if we let Taiwan fall. In addition to also the chips, but like in a geopolitical sense, it puts us on a weak stage.
I disagree with you completely there, Gavin. And here's why. I just
Ooh,
finished.
spicy. Spicy.
I just finished Peter Zehan's book. It's called, let's see here, it is the End of the World is Just the Beginning. And what that book's basic discussion is exactly what you're talking about, and how the United States, over the past, well, since World War II, has been sacrificing its own capacity in order to patrol and protect the various seas around the world. Okay, that it talks about that. It's a major theme, and its second major theme is understanding the population collapse that is about to happen within the next 2 to 3 years across the majority of the globe. Okay, and so basically, what this book is discussing is it's saying that global trade as we know it is only in existence because of the American peace that we have established, right? So let's say, you have goods in one country, because American ships are defending the seaways, you can get those goods to another country. And that's important because according to Peter, you need 3 major resources in your country in order to become as basically to civilize. Those 3 resources being fossil fuels, being iron, and being fuel. And if you didn't have one of those 3 resources, you weren't able to become a civilized nation because, well, you couldn't, right? You didn't have the steel in order to build structures. You didn't have cheap energy in order to create manufacturing, or you didn't have food in order to build up a population, right? So if you didn't have one of those 3, you couldn't civilize. However, due to American presence across the seaways, now all you needed was one of those resources to become a civilized nation, right? If you had excess iron, for example, you could go and trade with another country that had excess coal or excess oil and get that resource. Or if you had excess oil, you could trade with another nation in order to get foodstuffs if you had difficulty growing foodstuffs, etc. So, Gavin, when you said that if America withdraws from the global seaways, it'll make America weaker as a global superpower. It's actually the reverse. America's sacrificing itself in order to protect these seaways. And what's likely going to happen, and Peter talks about, is when we withdraw, a lot of these nations globally that only have 1 or 2 of these resources will begin collapse. Okay? Because they don't have steel, because they don't have food, or because they don't have energy in the terms of fossil fuels, they will begin to uncivilize as a nation. And so therefore, because America has all 3 of those major resources, America won't be as affected or affected at all if they withdraw from those sea lanes, because America has such massive resources within it that it can trade amongst itself and begin to develop those industries while everybody else begins to collapse, which is why America withdrawing is not a death knell for America. America doesn't get weaker, it actually gets stronger on the global stage, because you just cut down the majority of countries to almost pre-civilization levels, right? And what Peter was talking about also within this book is that you got this goes directly into your paper tiger discussion about the economy of China and how it's stronger well, it's not as strong as it appears, is that China has a demographic shift that is huge and larger than they were originally reporting. That demographic shift is saying you've got so many old people in China and you've got so many young people in China, right? And what's happening is these old people are beginning to enter into elderly years, whether that be retirement or death. And you have a bunch of these young people that are, well, I'm just going to say it, there aren't any. The amount of shift between the old generation of China and the young generation of China is significant. It's so significant, in fact, that you're going to see the manufacturing sector of China drop off the map because there's not enough people to do the manufacturing that they were doing. And China was lying about their population numbers, and that was found out recently, right? So now all of a sudden you've got all these factories, and there's not going to be workers in those factories in China. And so that economic engine is going to begin to collapse. And America might not see that it is opportune. This is what Peter's assertion is that it's opportune to protect the seaways to get Chinese goods. And that's going to completely decimate China's economy because China, I believe it's 9 out of the 10 inputs that it needs for food production, it imports. So China does not have food. And if China loses their manufacturing sector, which they will, they won't have goods to trade. And if United States no longer sees that China is valuable to trade with or to protect those seaways for trading, they're not even going to be able to get those few goods that they have out into the market. China also had severe difficulties beginning to make higher tier goods, unlike Japan. So Japan, as its demographics age, they said, okay, we're going to stop focusing on low tier goods, right? We're going to focus on high tier goods that take extreme skill to manufacture. And that's why Japan was able to avoid their demographic shift because they said, okay, we're going to make the best goods out of every single sector that we're still going to be involved in. And then we're going to export our manufacturing to other nations for those lower tier goods, right? So that's why, for example, Toyota has a manufacturing plant in Mexico, and then that money goes back to Japan because they don't want to use human resources to make low tier auto goods when they could make higher tier goods that give a higher premium and justify the higher cost which they need to support their government. China didn't do this. China said, hey, we're going to continue to manufacture low tier goods. And so when they begin to collapse and they begin to say we need higher profits in order to support our aging demographics and support our economy and all these other things, and not having the workers to manufacture those goods, they can't go as high in price increases as, say, Japan did, right? So that means that other countries, say Vietnam, say Mexico, right, that have more stable demographics and still at that same tier of manufacturing, those manufactured goods from China are going to move from China to Vietnam and to Mexico, which is exactly what this paper tiger thing is, because there's the paper tiger, paper dragon. We talked about that pre-stream a little bit. That economy of China is not sustainable as it is and will collapse. It's just a question of what's going to be that cause of the collapse. Is it going to be the United States withdrawing protection of the water? Is it going to be the population collapse of China and not being able to produce the goods they were producing to support themselves? And that's, that population collapse is due to that one-child policy, right? Which they instituted and really cut down their population, but they weren't thinking about, do we have the human capital to continue our economy once everybody ages out of the market? And that's what China's seeing, and that's why I disagree with you, Gavin, when you say if United States withdraws from protecting all of the world's oceans, United States becomes weaker. It's the reverse. Everybody collapses and America becomes stronger. Right? Which is
beautifully
strange.
said, dude. That was beautifully said. Holy smokes. Yeah.
Man, I mean,
I,
no, but
I
that's exactly
see.
right.
I
isn't it?
see.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, when presented with that kind of evidence, it's hard not to, right? I mean,
Well, by the way,
most people.
I completely disagree with almost all of Peter Zehan's politics. So I'm not just praising him because I agree with him. Peter's a green. I'm not a green, right? So
Yeah.
that's just basics of him explaining what's going on. That's why I draw different outcomes from what I think is beneficial to the United States than him. He's arguing, well, he thinks it's going to happen regardless, but he's arguing that globalism's a good thing economically, right? And we should be pursuing this and all that other fun stuff. And I disagree, but that's just because we disagree. So
Yeah.
he also talks about increasing carbon credits and things like that affecting various sectors of the market. I disagree with that, but I'm just throwing out those biases so you know that even though he's on the opposite side of the aisle than me, I agree with his basics premises, and we should be able to do that. We should be able to look at somebody and say, okay, here's the problems you're pointing out. I completely disagree with you on almost everything, but I agree with you on what you say the basic problems are that we see globally. So I just wanted to throw those biases out there so you guys knew where I was, and I wasn't being pro Peter just to because I thought he was cool.
Yeah. No, I mean, but that's an important clarification, isn't it? Because I think a lot of people who look at this issue, they look at it and they're like, I mean, they think like what Gavin said. They're on board with what Gavin said, as if that's the observable reality without seeing further down the right. And that just makes sense. When you think about the United States being in as many places as they are, you naturally see us withdrawing and you think, wow, we're being weaker. We'd be weaker in doing that. But it just goes to show there's a lot more happening behind the scenes than we might initially think. But to continue with the whole issue of the paper tiger of China, it's very interesting. Like you brought it up briefly, and I did want to kind of explain how the ramifications have played out with the whole one-child policy thing that China instituted a while ago. That is coming back to bite them in so many ways that there's no way they anticipated what has happened to them now happening when they instituted this initially. The whole one China, or the whole one child policy made by the Chinese government was initially intended to what? Just curb population expansion, because they have one of the largest populations on the planet Earth.
Yeah, they were afraid that they wouldn't be able to feed their entire population, which they still can't. And that was their big concern. So if they thought if they can reduce the number of people, they can continue to feed people. They weren't expecting improvements in agriculture and improvements in world trade. So that's what they didn't expect that. And so by cutting out that population, they just postponed. Well, they thought everything was going to be the same as it was, right? And they were just wrong. They didn't foresee a more interconnected China and a more specialized China for manufacturing, and they were just concerned about mouths to feed, and that really backfired. It also backfired in culturally in China. Having a male child is more important than a female child because that passes on the family. And so there is a significant separation between male and female people within China.
I was about to get into that.
So there's not enough women in China to pair off with all of the men. And that's also going to further reduce their population in the years to come because, well, it's not close to equal. And you need two to make a baby there. And so that's going to further shift the demographics of China to be smaller and smaller as time goes on, as people begin to retire and die off.
Hang on a second. I do want to clarify something. Did you say that the problem is that there are too many guys and too few girls?
Yep.
Oh, was it really? Oh, I thought it was the flip.
No, it's too many guys and too few girls. That's why there's Chinese men that are going to say India, go to say Japan, other third world nations in order to, well, Japan's not a third world nation, but going overseas to find spouses because there's not enough women in China.
Mm. Oh, okay. Never mind. Never mind. Yeah, you're right. You're right. It is that way. I was thinking I had my logic about what I was about to explain reversed. That is the case. Yes, the fact that the whole one-child policy did contribute to there being fewer girls is why this is becoming an issue for them. But it's actually leaking into other areas of their economy as well, because now that there are fewer women available to be married off to other Chinese men, it means that there's now competition internally in China for a bride, literally. And one of the ways that families in China tried to, or have tried to this point, get their younger men who are of marriable quotes age a better opportunity to get a wife is that they've been investing in real estate. So obviously, if you have a house, you're looked upon more favorably because it means you have the ability to fund it. You can take care of it, what have you, right? So that's actually been a significant trend over the last few years as well for Chinese families who are trying to get their men paired up with one of the few women available on the market, so to speak. And the problem with the Chinese housing market is that it was actually set up very, very poorly legally behind the scenes because I think one of the laws that they had at the time, I don't know if it's still a thing. I hope it's not because the problems that they're having with this. But one of the problems that they're having is that they initially set up this ability for a contractor or a home builder to agree to build a house for the willing buyer. And they'd agree to the mortgage. They'd set the whole thing up. And they tell them, hey, it will take, however many years long to build, months, years, what have you. And they would ask for payment of mortgage while they were building the house. So they were receiving payment from the person who bought the house while their house was being built. And the only problem is that they were not legally obligated to finish the house before accepting other offers. So what they ended up doing is that many of these contractors ended up going out to buy, so to speak, clients. They went out to go build many more housing projects for many different clients, all while not fully finishing their initial obligations. And that ended up turning out really poorly because now you have a bunch of people who've waited several months for a house that hasn't been built yet, and they're still paying these people who are building it who aren't really building it. They're just moving on to other projects. And this has caused lots of uproar, I think, as recently as the end of last year. I think there were several protests in this whole housing issue as a result of people not getting their houses. So it just goes to show the internal dysfunction sort of happening right now in the country of China. But with that said, I kind of want to transition now into sort of the concepts, the underlying principles behind this whole Chinese paper tiger thing that we're talking about. But before we do, this is your reminder again to like, share, and subscribe if you haven't already. If you're listening to this post-recorded, make sure to share this podcast with your friends, your family, or anybody else who might be interested in learning about cool topics like China and their aggression on the global stage. But with that said, the concepts at play, what do we think the initial concepts at play here are as it pertains to China and their leadership and the actions that they're taking?
Would I be able to add just a little bit more?
Yeah, I want to go backwards too.
Yeah, I just
never mind.
Add a little bit more onto the housing issue. One of the biggest real estate agencies in China is Evergrande, and it's an interesting problem where people's houses they're not fully built yet, and like there are protests going on in China where people are withholding their mortgages from banks, like putting the entire banking system on the brink of failure because that's one of, I don't know the exact percentage of real estate within the Chinese economy, but it's a massive percentage. It's like one of the key foundations of the Chinese economy. But like they're withholding their mortgages. At the same time this is happening, there are empty apartment buildings that are across the nation that are just being demolished because there's nobody to maintain them. They're just structures standing there. So people are literally going into multi-generational debt for houses they'll never get while they're destroying entire apartment complexes. But another part of the paper tiger issue to talk about, this is just one of the other industries that I know, it's the high-speed rail network. So that's one of the things. China wanted to project itself as this really modern power. So what they did was they built a stupid expensive high-speed rail network across the entire nation. But the problem is that high-speed rail, while being incredibly flashy and it shows that you have the wealth, it shows all of the things to the world. It's incredibly expensive to maintain. And it's only useful if so many people are going to be using it. But what's happening is there just isn't enough traffic on the rail networks. So China invested like millions, and I think it might have even capped it like $1 billion into this rail network, and nobody's using it. They just wasted money for no good reason. And they're just kind of sitting there half used and just kind of being a drag on the overall economy. But Andreas, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I just want to talk about housing in China and a few things that we should know before we move on to the next thing is China has, first off, it has internal illegal immigration. And that's something that we don't really think about in the United States, because in China, let's say that I live in, New Hampshire, right? And I want to move to New York City. I can do that. That's something that I can do, and nobody's going to be upset with me about it. I'll just pay more taxes or whatever when I move from New Hampshire to New York, right? That's really my huge change. In China, you are not allowed to do internal migration. And so what people are doing is they are migrating from rural China to these various cities, and they're becoming, illegal residents of the cities. And so they don't have access to the same infrastructure as the people that are within those cities. And they don't have the opportunities to really bolster that real estate in the same way that somebody that's naturally able to live in those Chinese major cities are. And so you're basically creating an underclass within inside of all of these major cities that, they can be deported to wherever they're from geographically in China, but are really just becoming not lesser people, because, people are equal, but they're lesser skilled people, and their children are becoming lesser skilled because they don't have access to the same educational markets, and they become basically a permanent pariah class, because even if you're born in, say, the city and your parents are illegal immigrants to that city, you can't access that education system. So those Chinese cities, right, are becoming less and less skilled, because more and more people can't access the Chinese infrastructure that they normally can access, right, if they were allowed to be in that city. Couple that with the fact is you've got the migration from the rural areas. Goes back to my former point of, since these manufacturing areas are going to begin collapsing as people age out, and China not being able to control, 9 out of the 10 inputs for agriculture, you're slowly going to begin to lose people that have the skills and the know-how in order to do farming in rural China to support these cities. So you've got all of this boiling up in China, also thereby affecting those Chinese markets for housing and real estate, because of this underclass of people that are, well, you can imagine, right? They're not proper Chinese for that area of China, right? Because they're illegal in that sense. I just wanted to throw that out there, because most people don't think about that or know about that. So
those were both very good points. I'm glad we got to touch on there before we transition topics. Again, what Gavin just said really briefly, he's absolutely right. They are massive. You can go look at I think that I saw a video a few months ago. You can go look at massive swaths of land with like apartment buildings that look like they were about to be completed. Like they've got a frame up and everything, like full skyscraper height, and they're just vacant. They're just vacant.
Yeah.
So
there's no people to live there, and they weren't finished, right? It's like there's that finished Paris replica city. I believe it's still half abandoned, right? Because they didn't have the demographics to move into that. It's partially because China was lying about their total population numbers, but it's symptomatic of the whole symptom. Scott, do you have anything you want to say or background context about China that you want to discuss before we begin to go into what we can learn from what's going on in China and how we can respond to it?
No, I don't have too much to say about the Chinese housing market. I appreciate the insight you guys are providing. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting stuff, as we can tell thus far. But yeah, just to transition us again, the concepts at play. So what do we think initially are sort of the underlying principles at play with this whole Chinese government being very aggressive at the global level?
I mean, the first thing that strikes out to me is just like China wants to put on this image of, it's like a paper tiger. A paper tiger, it looks really cool. It's really threatening, really scary, but it doesn't hold up to anything. It's just a facade. It's just an appearance. And it just like, what I think they're doing there is like, they just want to appear outwardly to others that they have it all. They've got it all. And like, you don't need to ask anything more. You don't look into anything more into it, because if you just look at the outside, look at them, they're the world's second largest economy, the world's second largest military. They have I think currently the most amount of people that live on the planet. But when you dig a little deeper, you can see all of the cracks and everything. And I think that's one of the principles at play inside the overall thing. They don't want to necessarily address everything that they need to, like the housing market or their population decline or manufacturing or political instability. They don't want to address any of that because it makes them look weak from the outside. But to actually address that thing would be beneficial to them and everyone else.
Yeah, I think about the things we don't know. I think about the things that China is doing here in the United States, that if things got really dicey between our countries, that I feel like China already has some fingernails in us already. If you look at like some of the Chinese technology that American companies use, that is directly related to the Chinese government, even like with the social media applications. But the Chinese government has tried to buy sections of land in the United States that has been suspicious, that we've looked at like why they want to buy land in that certain area. So to me, I think if the amount of information that they're collecting on the United States, that's what concerns me. And so to me, I think that there is potential more power that they have that we don't even know about because of the data that they're collecting on us. And then also I don't know if they can, the technology has a backward compatibility that, it could work and then all of a sudden they can do something and it won't work. But if we have that technology here in the States and we're not really sure about it, it's just an area of concern that I think is definitely relevant right now.
Yeah, I agree with you, Scott, on the technology aspect. Right, we've integrated. I remember a story during that ice storm in Texas, right, where the windmills began to freeze over, talking about how we were beginning to integrate Chinese developed electronics into our power grid. Well, in particular, it was about the Texas power grid and how that might not be a wise decision. Let's say if we were to get in conflict with China, because we don't know what back doors they have, say, into, Texas power, right? If something were to happen. So I absolutely agree with you, Scott, on the unknown aspect. I wonder, this is me pondering, if I know something, right, about, Chinese collapse economically, socially, and structurally, right, due to their demographics, I'm assuming, the millionaires and the billionaires of China know the same thing. And I wonder if they are divesting from China to avoid the economic losses that are going to occur when China ultimately does begin to not collapse necessarily, right? It might completely collapse, but to undergo political and social instability, and they might ride that wave out. When I was reading a book, American Kleptocracy, it was talking about how real estate is a major way to basically launder money, back, into to proper ways, and how, rich millionaires and billionaires and, well, just people smart with money in economically and politically. I'm trying to find the proper word. Not destitute. Lack of moral location, say, Africa and dictatorships, or Eastern Europe. They would put money into American markets, knowing that America would keep their money. And because of the way that we can anonymize purchase of real estate, it would protect their monetary interests in the case that somebody wanted to reappropriate money back into the country that was being pilfered. For example, let's say that you had $50 million. You could go to Cincinnati, Ohio, anonymously buy a lot of real estate, and then eventually, you as a dictator from, let's say, it's Mogadishu in Africa, I think it is, dictator in Africa, and the economic and social and political system switches, they would not have access to that money. And because we anonymize the purchase of real estate in the United States would not be able to help expropriate that money back to whatever nation that came from. It's a very interesting book. You should read it. Again, I disagree with the political opinions of the author, but it was very enlightening. And in the fact of all these Chinese people purchasing all this real estate in the United States, I wonder if they're doing the same thing, expecting a Chinese collapse before it occurs, right? So that the people of China can't say all of these political elites of the CCP, all these business people of the CCP were improperly gaining off of our labor. They were exploiting us. We, as an international body, are saying that you need to return that money because, most countries agree with that assessment, right? If there's a guy out of Africa and he bought a bunch of Michael Jackson stuff, right, to try to launder money, and eventually America returned that money to that country later on down the line, if I'm not mistaken. And it's the same kind of thing to try to move money out of China before China goes under, so they got their safety nest when things go bad. I'm curious. I don't know. Scott, do you have an opinion on that, or is this the first you've heard of that technique?
That aspect of it, yeah. I thought, they were using that, buying the tracts of land to potentially interfere or collect communications, the tracts of land are very near to critical infrastructure. Mm-hmm. So I was hearing more about that aspect of it, the espionage side of it, rather than having assets over here.
Okay. Yeah. I was just curious if you heard about that other side or not.
Yeah, no, I hadn't.
Yeah. Because I believe, what is it? Is it Louisiana or is it Alabama? That there's a massive amount of Chinese investment in real estate down there, which is why I began to think of that. There's also a bunch of German investment in those two regions as well. That's besides the point. That's another issue we can talk about later. But I was just curious if you have those similar conclusions. But that's fine.
Yeah, you did bring up a good point there, though, that China is trying to spread. They're trying their influence as much as they can, which does kind of lead me to believe that this is kind of a power struggle issue, which is pretty apparent at this point in time. It's interesting to see how many problems they have at mainland home, and yet at the same time, they're trying to play it off as if, no, we're spreading. See how powerful we are? We got influence across the globe. We're investing in Africa. We're investing in places in the United States. We're investing everywhere. And I mean, it's interesting to see, right? When you put everything into perspective, you're just like, what is going on here? When you actually see, wow, why are we scared of China? For why? Like, it's pretty interesting to think about. But I mean, again, a lot of this is caused by the fact that you have the government in China, which effectively thinks it's God. They put themselves in that position. They said, hey, whatever we say goes, whatever we want to happen happens, wherever we want to invest, we invest. And whatever rules we institute, that's just the way it is, and you got to live with it. So it's interesting to see how all of that plays out in perspective. Gavin, you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, no, it was just going back into my original purpose, my original point earlier. It was just like, you're like, yeah, we got all this investment out here. We got all this economic power. You guys should be scared of us. But when you look past that initial surface of the paper tiger, you see that, there's nothing on the inside. It'll fold over if you breathe on it wrong.
Yeah.
And it's just inevitable. Yeah, but that's all I really got to add on to there.
No, I want to talk about something Chris said. I know this keep going back in the background, but it's so important to understand as we move forward in the world. Chris was talking about investment into Africa. And the reason why I think that's significant is because of the demographics issue I was talking about earlier, right? China is losing their ability to produce low-grade materials because of aging populations, low removal of manufacturing. So China right now is looking to Africa as future China for China, right? And that might not make sense. They're looking for their own China in the form of Africa, so they can get those low-grade materials and potentially move and get goods. And that's what they're seeing Africa as is potential future China for them, just like how the United States is looking at Mexico as second China.
Just a really quick note onto that too. It's like China kind of set up a weird debt trap for nations. Like in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, they have 70% of the world, and I don't remember exactly what it's used for, but it's used in some sort of computing, like in a chip somewhere. And China loaned out money to get these mines built out in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. But when it couldn't pay its debt, they were like, okay, these are our mines now. They're manned by Chinese civilians, exported to China, basically. So, with 70% of the world's cobalt in this one nation and basically only operated by Chinese officials, they've got a monopoly there, just getting those raw materials to get them exported, to get, using the Africa as their China in a sense. Yeah.
It's a completely side point, but we should talk about in the future. We should talk about artisan miners in the Congo and other nations like that because of this action. We're not going to talk about it tonight, but it's a potential future topic because it goes into United States, our greening movement, and how that is within third world countries, and we should be aware of the situations in those countries as related, at the very least, to artisan mining and other aspects.
Yeah, I mean, well, there you go. Those are the underlying concepts at play effectively. You've got on one side China just portraying that they're all that, and on the other end, you're just like, wow, what is going on? I could just poke a hole right through you, just paper tiger. It's really just a two-faced operation. But with that said, we'll transition into takeaways and response. And I know, Scott, you're new to this, but I'm sure you probably heard this part of the show before. This is kind of where we tie in the faith aspect. So I don't know exactly where you stand from a faith-based perspective, but I'm interested to see what the other hosts might have to say, particularly as it pertains to takeaways that we can apply from our Christian perspective and our worldview when we see something like China making such bold claims and just completely not living up to them when you dig into them a little bit deeper, maybe at a macro level or at a micro level. Maybe it's not even China. Maybe it's an influencer, somebody in the country who has an influence over people who is pretending to be all this, and then at the same time they're not. So I'm interested to see what takeaway ideas we have about this particular issue.
Well, yeah, if we apply China to our own lives, right? Often as believers, I don't know what Scott is, but we like to project that we are more than we are, right? and that it's exactly the same as how China is projecting that it's more than it is, right? We try to come off as holier than thou, and we don't really become true, genuine people that can ask for help, right? China can instead of being the paper thing that it is, right? It could say, okay, international markets, we need help here, here, and here, right? They might take a short term hit to their economy, but they might end up being stronger for it in the end, right? As other nations seek to fill in the gaps of that Chinese market. But since they can't accept that, they remain the paper tiger they are. And likewise, when we do the same thing, we may take a hit to our initial reputation, but by exposing our weakness, right, we can get others to help us to fix those inherent problems.
Mm. Yeah, that is a good point. I mean, it's never a bad thing to ask for help. I know we do tend to push the idea of help aside, be like, no, I got it, I can take it, I can handle it, whatever it may be, right? But I mean, nobody who's really good at what they're good at got to where they're at now by not asking anybody for help. Like everybody's had help at some point along their journey, right? For whatever it is. And it's very important that we do embrace the idea of needing help. That doesn't mean you need to ask for help with absolutely everything, because obviously there will be things that you can handle, and there might be something that you can handle that somebody else can't. But overall, just the idea of asking for help and knowing what your abilities are and knowing what your abilities aren't is very important. It's very critical to our lives in general as people, not even just as Christians, but as the people or for people in general, right? I mean, that's how we get things done. We find the people who know what they know, who are experts at what they're experts at, and they can help us understand the areas that we might be less understanding of. But the takeaway that I got particularly was more so along the lines of that we need to learn to manage what we can manage and let the rest be, or trust God to manage the rest for us. Because ultimately we believe, like Romans 8:28, all things work together for the good of those who seek God and follow according to his commands. So effectively, we shouldn't be stressed about whatever China's portraying. We shouldn't be worried about what we can't control. It just takes away from our life to worry and spend time thinking about people who really don't ultimately care about us. And I guess this instance with China, the Chinese government, who doesn't care what the people think. They just care about doing what they want to do. It's ultimately, literally worthless to worry about something that you can't control. So I think we do need to be more confident in our own abilities to manage what we can control, to develop our own skills. Everybody has their own skills. If we work on honing in on those and understanding and learning about what those are, we can develop those, we can contribute to society, and we can be just less stressed and less worried. I think that's a good idea. What do you think, Gavin?
Well, I just wanted to add on to what you were saying earlier about like needing to get help. I think like the takeaway that I took away from that was, China, like we're finding out more and more that they're lying about a lot of their economic figures, their population figures. Like we're finding out the things that look bad on the outside are much worse than they actually are. And I feel like that's where that's my takeaway. We need to like analyze ourselves, like where can I be bettering myself? Where am I lying about how good I am? So then we can take that opportunity and be like, okay, I am struggling right here. It might make me look weak for a while to work on it, but ultimately I just need to ask for help on that. To be a better human overall. I can be a better friend, better son, better parent, better whoever, better worker. Just like, even if it makes you seem weak for a little bit, it ultimately does only good to you, you know?
Right.
But
Well,
Dad, I just want to, oh yeah, sorry.
I was going to tie that back into what we're talking about with Taiwan and China, right? China projects all this strength, and they're saying, oh, we could take Taiwan back. We can control the South Pacific, all these other things, which antagonizes America, basically, right? As the patrolling body of all those waters. Right, and that is counter to their needed goals, right, which is mainly food, right? And if they were to get America mad enough to stop patrolling all those waters, they're going to have a collapse in food supply, and they're not going to be able to have their issues addressed, right? So they're seeing their weakness and attacking rather than saying, okay, America, the rest of the world, we need help with food. more so than we're letting on, right? More so than just buying it. And we're not going to antagonize you while we don't have goods to trade, right?
Mm.
So that's you know, that gets back to that point, right? When you're weak, you shouldn't be going out and, you know, punching the next guy over, because that doesn't help you, which is what China's going to do, and they're going to end up alone at the end of this. Let's say they attack Taiwan, you know, America's going to put sanctions on them, because you know, I have a very poor opinion about America ending up in involvement to protect Taiwan. We saw what happened in Ukraine. We saw what happened in various other arenas when various allies got attacked. And so, you know, we'll end up putting sanctions on them and maybe stopping protecting their shipping. And that's just going to hurt China to a much larger extent, because, you know, America is going to get their own silicon development here, hopefully soon, since we started both under Trump and continued under Biden. So it's just it's a poor decision. And it really translates to us, right? We often are like that, hurting people that might be able to help us later, because we don't want to show that weakness. Gavin, you wanted to point this back to your dad?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say, like, you know, I know you aren't a believer, Dad, but I do know you're a man of morals. I just want to hear what your inner moral compass is saying.
Well, I think that I've seen a difference between like how you behave as a man or a person about showing. You talk about it's your weakness by saying that you need something. I disagree with that. I think that shows strength to me. If you can admit that you need help, you know, I'll never look at anybody as that's a weak point for me. I think that's actually one of your strongest points. If you can stop and say, I need some help. And so, at a personal level, I totally agree with that. You know, I just think I'm a history guy. I'm a history major. You know, I look at everything that's happened in the last like 100 years. You know, all the wars and so many. It's through alliances. It's like, hey, I got your back, and it's unconditional. And then, you know, sometimes we lose our ability to choose. Like we're pretty tied to Taiwan right now. We've made military investments, economic investments, verbal investments. I mean, just everything. We're for Taiwan. So I feel like we've lost some of our ability to maneuver. So that's what scares me a little bit. Is that you know, like in World War I, you know, that whole war started through a series of alliances. Like, I'm going to attack you. You know, I'm going to defend this other country. Basically, the whole world gets in flames. So I'm seeing some similarities. It's not going to be the same thing. But I think it's a national pride with communism in China. I think that their way of life is dying out. And if you look historically, countries don't reach out for help. They do exactly what China's doing, like what Japan did in World War II when they ran out of resources. They didn't say, I need more resources. They said, I'm going to take them. And I feel like, you know, maybe China's in that same boat, but I think that's a sense of national pride. And I just don't see them asking for help. I just see this as a road that they're on, and you know, I feel like we're on that road with them. So it's just, that's what concerns me. But I mean, I think that's just the difference between you know countries and leaders and how we operate individually, because it just seems like national interests are very different than personal interests.
Right. Well, Japan. I want to counter your point just a little bit. Right after World War II, Japan still didn't have the oil that they lost, right? So they said, okay, well, we need to begin trade with the rest of the world so that we can get that resource, right, out of those three resources that we need. And so they really became a large manufacturer, and now moving into high-end manufacturing in order to get that missing resource, right? China has the same opportunity right now that Japan did, you know, after World War II, to say we're going to, you know, pivot our economy so that we can survive whatever economic issue that we have. But they're going with the aggression posture. So I'm half disagreeing with you, Scott, and half not, because you know there's other options than, you know, striking out to try to take Taiwan. In order to sustain China, right? They can pivot economically. They could, do something in order to gain those resources that they need.
Yeah, if they can, China can show some foresight, because Japan, that was forced upon them, right? They tried their way, they lost the war, and they were forced to adapt, right? And if China can show some foresight and say, okay, maybe we can't do what we want to do, and maybe we should just save all that and just try to, reach out and learn from history. But let's yet to be seen if they can do something like that.
Yeah, I don't think they will. I think they're probably just going to collapse.
See, that's what I think. It's like, I feel like they get on a course and it's difficult to get off that course. And the way people are digging in right now, and the clear factions, I think you get into a kind of a preset road, and it's kind of hard to get off that.
Absolutely. Yeah, I just don't think we'll intervene when Taiwan gets attacked. That's my one major disagreement with you. I think we'll let it go, because we'll be a few years out from having our own silicon, right?
Yeah, I've heard the same thing. They're investing in silicon here in the States.
Yeah.
But I mean, those are all good points, guys. So I guess to leave the listeners or the viewers with something, if you could summarize it really briefly, what's one takeaway you want somebody watching this right now or listening to this later to come away from this discussion with?
You want me to start?
Go for it. Why not?
One takeaway that I want to have the listeners go away with, it's not something we talked about a ton, but, China made a bunch of decisions out of a place of weakness, right? They had food issues, so they did the one child. They had, they're having demographic collapse, so they're getting aggressive. Making decisions, out of weakness is not, a smart way to go about. When you're in a weak state, you shouldn't be making, major decisions in your personal life, or, well, I guess in a country in general. And that's something that I think is a major takeaway that we didn't discuss as much as I would have liked. But making those decisions out of weakness is not ever a good strategy.
Fair enough. Gavin?
I mean, just to kind of add on to what my dad was saying earlier, like, you need to take some time to work on yourself, like China needs to do right now. Don't think of yourself as weak. Think of yourself as strong. And if you see someone working on themselves, don't see them as weak. See them as strong and help them. And I just wish we had that opportunity to do internationally, but as we have discussed.
Exactly, man. 'Tis the tough breakdown. But anyways, Scott?
Well, I just appreciate the looking at this from all perspectives, and I think that's really important that we look at it typically from a Western perspective, but when we start discussing about what China is facing and about the history they have and about what they want to do, just like every other sovereign country has the right to do. We see them doing this, and to me, it's just I think it's just better to have an understanding of where they're coming from, and then it's going to help us understand the whole situation. So conversations like this are fantastic, and I appreciate being a part of it.
Oh yeah, 100%. I totally agree with you. I think my takeaway for the listeners and the viewers is probably just going to be confident. Be confident in your abilities, develop your abilities, and don't worry about the things you can't control, because you can't control them, and you're not going to be able to change them. All you can do is
you're not going to be able to change China.
Yeah, you're not going to be able to change China. Okay, that is fair. That's a fair point. You might be able to change some things. China's not one of those things, but nonetheless, don't worry about it. If you can, you can't. Don't worry about it, and that's where I'll leave that. Any other closing thoughts, gentlemen?
I just wanted.
But also, thank you, Dad, for joining us on this episode. It was wonderful having you. This was, I think, one of my favorite discussions so far.
That was my pleasure, guys. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, no, I can echo that. That was fun. It was fun to have your perspective on this show for the first time. Our first ever guest. You claim that title.
Second guest.
Yeah.
There
we
you
have
go.
Cup.
Yeah. Rare Cup. Sorry, but this is the first ever official one who we had planned. Rare Cup. For those of you who might be new to the podcast, we had this guy on. He was watching on our Twitch a long time ago. Well, not really. It was like a few weeks ago. but he was watching our Twitch. We allowed him to hop into our discussion, like actually in the stream from the Twitch chat. And I guess that's who Andreas is considering our first official guest. But I beg to differ on technicality. Anyway, Andreas, I do believe you had something to tell the people.
Oh yeah, like, share, and subscribe. These discussions are always better with you guys. So the more that we see that you guys are watching, viewing, and eventually commenting in our chat live, the more that we can interact with you and have a good time. Just like we did with Rare Cup that one time and did a few other times. So we're excited. The more you share this, the more chances we have to interact with you and talk about what you guys want to talk about here in relation to these topics. We'll see you guys soon in about 15 minutes on the next episode, in which case we will be doing a retrospective of Elon Musk buying Twitter and what kind of storm that caused. We look forward to seeing you guys in about 15 minutes on the other channel. Peace.
Yeah. See you.